Hi, it's Jeff here from RhinoCo Technology. In this video, I'm going to be explaining the main menu setting camera section of the VIP Vision NVR8PRO6 8-channel network video recorder. While this video has been made using the NVR8PRO6, the content within applies broadly to all VIP Vision NVRs. So the first thing I'm going to do is just double click so that you can see all the cameras and select main menu. Now, I need to then enter my username and password. By default, username is 68 and password is 68. So I'll go enter and OK. Now, as I said before, we're going to be selecting main menu, setting, and then camera. So if I hover over the camera section here, you can see what it says: add remote device, add remote device, set or query IP camera configuration. So I'm going to click on that one there. So what you'll see is down the left here we'll have 4 options: remote, image, encode, and camera name. And within remote, which is the first option, we've got 4 options at the top of this page here. So we've got first tab, which is remote, second tab status, third tab firmware, fourth tab upgrade. So we'll start on the remote tab. So the remote tab essentially shows you all the cameras that the recorder can see and all the cameras that the recorder is connected to. So the first section up here, which I'm moving around with my mouse now, shows you all the cameras the recorder can see. Now this includes cameras that it's seeing on its network interface, its LAN network interface, such as these cameras up here, so 10.1.100.144. It shows you the port, shows you the type of product which is connected, whether that be an HD CVI recorder, such as this one up here, IP cameras, or a DVR, for instance. And it will also show you cameras which are connected directly to the Power over Ethernet or PoE ports on the recorder. So these cameras down here are good examples of that. So 10.2.2.65 is connected to port 1 and it's an IP camera. So it's worth noting that any cameras which are actually detected in here are detected via broadcast. So now what that means is if for some reason your LAN interface has multiple subnets on it and your NVR has not yet been configured to use those subnets, you'll see that you'll get cameras here, but you won't actually be able to connect to them. So make sure that if, for instance, I've got a 10.1.115.163 address like this, and my subnet mask is 255.255.0.0, that I set my recorder up in the 10.1.x.x range. So let's say I set it to 10.1.1.1 would be fine in this case. So if for some reason I do need to change the IP address of a camera before I add it, let's say it's in a different subnet and I want to change, I want to keep the subnet of the recorder the same. So I can do that for any camera which is not connected directly to the recorder through its PoE ports by clicking this section here under Modify. Now that'll bring up a separate window here showing you IP setting. It'll allow you to set DHCP or a static address, and you will, however, have to obviously know the username and password for the camera to set it through here. Once you've done that, click OK, and it will apply those settings to the camera. At that point, you will need to click Device Search down here so that it refreshes this page, and then it will show up using the new IP address. The second, I suppose, section across here is Add. So this is if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to add another camera, and it was within the range. So let's select, let's pick this camera here. So I'll select this one here. So click the checkbox. You can select multiple cameras at a time if you have space, as you'll see in a second. I'll click Add, and the recorder will connect to it. Now this bottom section here shows you all the cameras that the recorder can currently connect to. We'll go a bit further through that in a moment, but essentially just see that we've now got a camera 10.1.115.115 connected to camera 8 on this recorder, and it's gone green, so that's good. I'll show you that in a second. So the other things that you may want to be able to do in this top section here when you're just looking for cameras, if you've got a lot of cameras, you may want to sort them by IP address, so you can click IP address, it'll sort by IP. You may want to sort them by port, so just click on port and it will show you, obviously this is the port that the camera uses to connect, not its web port. So you know, if for instance you've got an OnViv camera, it might connect, it might show up on a different port, or if obviously if it's plugged in directly, it's not going to show you a port number at all. It will instead show you a port a physical port location. So this camera here is connected to port 8. The next thing in the list is we've got type. So type obviously refers to what sort of camera you've got in there, whether it's an IP camera. Some cameras also show you the model in this list as well. You can sort that by just clicking type and obviously scroll up and down this list. Something else you've got up here is MAC address, so we can sort on MAC address, doing the same thing. Manufacturer we could sort by, or device name we can sort by. So that's pretty much it for that top section there. The only other thing is you may want to actually sort. Let's say you know the IP address of a camera. We can actually search by IP address or MAC address. So let's say 10.2.2.65. Search, and it shows me that camera. Or maybe I want to actually see all the 10.2.2 cameras. Click search, it'll show me that. The same applies for MAC address. Let's say I want to see all the cameras starting with 3C and search. It'll show me all the cameras with MAC addresses starting with 3C. So that's pretty straightforward, that section at the top there. Now, moving to the bottom section down here, this shows you all the cameras, all the devices which are currently added to this recorder and are in use. So as this is an 8-channel recorder, we're seeing 8 devices down here because I've added the maximum number of devices that I can add to this recorder. If I go to add another one, so let's say I'll click here and go add, I'll get an error saying, please remove device first, there is no free digital channel now, which is essentially it's just telling me that I've only got an 8-channel recorder and I've tried to add a 9th channel. So I suppose there's a few things down here which are useful to know. So once you've added a recorder, or added a camera I should say, this channel number down here obviously is the channel number that the recorder is going to associate with it. So in live view and playback, that's the channel that's going to be associated with that camera. If for some reason you didn't want the camera I just added in position 8, you wanted it in position 5, you would delete the cameras from here and then re-add that camera 5th. So add 4 cameras and then add the one that you want in the 5th position. Moving across from there, we have modify. So modify essentially just lets us change IP addresses and some other settings on the camera. So the first thing you've got at the top here is manufacturer. Leave it as private for all VIP Vision cameras. Other cameras you may need to change this. IP address, obviously self-explanatory. It's the IP address of the camera that we've just added. TCP port is the port that we're connecting to the camera with. This is not the web port generally. It's the port where we're actually going to be getting video data from. Admin is the username, and the password down here, obviously this particular camera is set to default and is admin. Now obviously if you change the IP address, the username and password using the web interface of the camera, you will want to change that in here as well, otherwise it will not connect. You can test connection using this button here if let's say you've just changed username and password and you want to make sure it connects. And moving down here you can set channel numbers and things, but this is somewhat dependent on where you've got the camera plugged in, whether it's in the PoE ports or not. A remote channel number, if you're connecting to a recorder, so for instance, let's say I was connecting to another NVR which had 8 channels on there and I wanted to pull across the 4th channel, in this section it would show me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I would select number 4 and then I would be pulling the 4th channel from the recorder, the network video recorder, the remote network video recorder. Channel here is the channel that we've obviously, essentially that's been set up for us when we've added this camera. As I described before, to change the channel, delete the ones that you want to delete and re-add it in its correct position. The decode buffer essentially sets up the caching behavior for this channel, or the buffer behavior for this channel on the recorder. So because we're often connecting to cameras using TCP, the recorder can, if for some reason a packet goes missing, it can request that packet from the recorder, from the camera I should say, and insert it into the buffer before displaying it on screen. Now this is probably, it's quite good for lossy connections. So for instance, if you've got a really, like a poor internet connection that you're pulling a camera across, for instance, or you're connecting across a wireless link. However, having a large buffer can also add delay or will add delay to your video. So in certain situations, it's undesirable to have a delay, at which point you may want to set this down here to real time instead of default. If for some reason you really do need all of the video there, so you don't want any stuttering at all, you don't want to have missed frames or a broken up picture due to your internet connection, you can set it to fluent, which is a more aggressive buffering strategy, where it will actually increase the size of the buffer, and that will hopefully reduce the amount of screen tearing and loss that you have in the video. So the next section that we've got down here, so that's basically, that's all from the modify section here. So the next thing you may need to use often is obviously we've got these delete buttons down here. Now the delete button will remove the camera from the recorder, so if I click that X, that camera is now gone. If I want to add that camera back in again, obviously I want to do what I did before, which is select 115, 115, 115, and add that again. So the next thing you'll see in this list here will be status. Status essentially tells you whether the IP camera is connected and working correctly. A red icon here will indicate that the camera has an issue for whatever reason. The recorder was unable to connect to it, whether that be network related or it might be something as simple as the camera not being connected or powered up. And green light means everything is good. So stepping along from here, you can see the IP address of the camera. Again, we can see the port that the camera is connected to. Again, this shows whether it's connected to an actual port, so a TCP port in this case, or whether we're connected to a physical port on the recorder, such as this camera up here is connected to port 7. The next one we have is the device name. Now, by default, the device name will be the serial number of the camera. However, it can also be named, which we'll go through in another section going ahead. Next thing you've got, again, is the remote channel number, which is what we were talking about before, the manufacturer, and the camera name. So camera name and device name can actually be set separately. Before we go any further, it's worth noting that the settings that you change in this section here, so the modify section and deleting cameras, will actually apply immediately before you click the OK button or apply button. So just keep that in mind before you delete things that you may not want to actually delete. So the next thing that we've got in this list here is status. So the status section actually shows us information about the cameras we've got connected to the recorder. So in this case, we have obviously 8 channels connected. It says that they're all green, shows the IP addresses, video detect, so if there's currently got motion on the cameras, which these ones do, external alarm, whether the external alarm is currently active, external alarm input on the camera that is active, and the camera name. So this is just basically a cut down version of what was on the remote section. It's good just for a brief overview of what the cameras are actually doing. Obviously we've got a refresh button down here. That'll give us the most up-to-date information about the cameras, whether that be alarm or video detect information. So next thing in this list here is the firmware tab. Now this shows us the firmware loaded on each camera by IP address. So if for some reason we do need to upgrade firmware on the cameras, or tech support asks you for the firmware versions on cameras, this is where you'll come to look at it. So system version is the section that we're after at the top here. This is only really useful, I guess, is if we do need you to upgrade firmware on the cameras for some reason. So the next tab up here is actually upgrading the firmware on the cameras. So that's done through the select section up here. Well, sorry, we'll need a USB device inserted first, but essentially you would load the firmware file off the USB device and you'd select the cameras to upgrade and you click start upgrade. Now, we'll do another video on this later. It's not something you'll have to do very often. So that's everything for the remote section. So if we go to image, so the image section essentially changes the behavior of the camera's image sensor, or how the camera interprets the image that it's seeing. So the first thing that you've got at the top here is channel selection. So obviously at the moment I'm selected on channel 1. Change the channel to whatever channel you want to configure. So I can go channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, etc. I'm going to go back to channel 1. Day and night up here actually changes the settings for the camera depending on the amount of light entering the photodiode. So day is determined by lots of light entering the photodiode on the camera. Night is determined by less light or very little light entering the photodiode on the camera. So when it's light outside, essentially, the camera is going to interpret the day mode configuration. When it's dark outside, it's going to interpret the night mode configuration. Now, the other thing that you can do is if for some reason you don't trust the photodiode on the camera, so let's say you've got a situation where the certain section where the camera is going to be very shaded, but it's actually looking at a bright patch away from there, you can actually switch by period as well. So you can tell it when the sunrise time is and when the sunset time is. So normally you want to just configure day and night, leave the sunset mode out. So in the day section here, well, I will say that there's certain sections that are not configured by day and night, one of them being the first section up here, which is mirror. So mirror flips the camera or mirrors the image of the camera. That's typically used with image flip. So if for some reason you've mounted the camera up the wrong way around, and rather than getting up there and moving the camera, you want to actually just flip it digitally, you'll need to mirror the camera image and then apply a 180-degree flip as well. So that'll bring it back just the same way as if you'd actually mounted the camera around the correct way. So that's one time there. Essentially, you'll always use mirror with 180-degree flip. However, on the flip section here, there's actually a 90-degree and 270-degree flip as well. Now, that may sound strange at first, but what it's actually designed for is if for some reason you've got a situation, let's say we're looking down a hallway where a widescreen 16:9 image is not really of much use to us, but if we had a narrow 9:16 image, that would help us a lot. So what we can do instead is flip the camera to 90 degrees, so it's like the camera's mounted at 90 degrees. Obviously, if you flip it in the other direction, you can mount it at 270 degrees, and then that will give us a very, very narrow but very long image, which is quite good for, like I said, hallways or looking down the sides of buildings, things like that. It's very good to set up. We'll do another video showing that a little more in depth later, but essentially that's what that section there is. So the sections that are affected by the day and night config modes are the BLC mode or backlight compensation mode. Now it says BLC mode, but it also includes WDR or wide dynamic range and HLC or highlight compensation. Again, we'll do another video showing the differences between BLC, WDR and HLC later on, but essentially when we've got this in stop, everything's turned off. BLC mode is when BLC, backlight compensation, is turned on. WDR is when wide dynamic range is turned on, and HLC is when highlight compensation is turned on. Now, as I said before, I could set WDR during the day, and I could go to my night section and turn on highlight compensation. If for some reason I needed to do it to, say, pick up number plates at night, for instance, you might want highlight compensation turned on. So if I go back to day here, you'll see that WDR is still turned on. I'll move that to stop, but that's just showing you that, yeah, there's differences between day and night on here. Now, the same can be said for white balance. Now, white balance is something that usually auto white balance works quite well on these cameras. It's very rare that you'll actually want to change any of the settings white balance wise on these cameras, but sometimes, let's say for instance you've got a room which is filled with mercury vapor lights, like mercury vapor high bay lights, which have a very green tinge to them. You may want to come in here, set customized, and just play with your red and blue gain until your colors look true. Like I said, it's one of those things, it's kind of rare. You're not going to do it very often, but it's there if you need it. So I'm going to leave that back at auto. Our day and light section. Now what this actually does is changes the behavior of the camera based off the input coming into the photodiode that we were talking about earlier. So normally during the day, when the photodiode's detecting light, you're going to want to be in day mode, so color mode, and normally during the night, if I select that up here, you're going to be wanting to, if this is in auto mode, you're going to want to be setting it, or it's going to automatically be set for you at night mode, so with infrared LEDs on and the IR cut filter removed. However, there are certain situations where you may want to, even at night, set the camera into color mode. So for instance, if you've got a camera which is one of our Starlight series cameras, for instance, or the VIP Vision Starlight series cameras, you may want to actually be viewing in color mode at night simply because the camera is very good in low light conditions. So that's what I would do here. So I would select, I would move from day to night, and I would change night, which was auto, I would change it to colorful and apply that setting. Now what that's going to actually do is At night, we're going to no longer go into night mode, so the camera's not going to flip into black and white mode. Like I said, it's not used very often. Typically a day-night camera, you want it to be in day mode during the day and night mode at night, but there are certain situations where you may want to set that up. Now, the final thing on this page is your saturation, brightness, contrast, sharpness, and 3D noise reduction. Now, 3D and R is probably the only one on here. The noise reduction section is the one that you wouldn't be familiar with. So saturation, color saturation, brightness, the brightness of the image, contrast, obviously your difference between dark and light areas, and your sharpness is basically it takes out some of the image grain. Now your noise reduction does, I suppose, sharpness on another level. So what it does is it looks for pixels that are noise, what would be commonly considered as noise, and removes them. Now this is very good for an IP camera, because the more noise that you can remove, the less the compression has to work, and the lower your file sizes are for a given, or the higher your quality is for a given bitrate, or if you're running in variable bitrate mode, the less space you're going to be using up for a given image. Now that's good, and you will often just want to leave 3D noise reduction at 50. If, however, you do notice that either A, there's more grain than you would like, you can turn up the noise reduction, so head up towards 100. Or if for some reason you're losing detail, so let's say you've got text on the side of a building, or you're looking at number plates or something like that, and your noise reduction is making them fuzzy. Now you can turn your noise reduction down. Obviously, keep in mind, as I move the noise reduction down, I'm going to be getting more grain in the image. So it's sort of, it's going to, I suppose, make it somewhat easier to see things that might be made fuzzy by the noise reduction, but it's a trade-off. You will see more grain, and you are going to be using more storage space for a given image. So I'll leave that back at 50. And in this section, obviously clicking apply or clicking OK will save everything. If you want to, you can refresh and pull whatever the settings were currently in the camera back. And again, if you want to, you can click the default button and send everything in the camera back to the way that it was from factory settings. So the next section in our list is encode. So the encode section has 3 tabs, the first being encode, the second being overlay, and the third being snapshot. So the encode tab essentially relates to everything that the camera does to package video before sending it to the recorder. So this includes your compression, your resolution, frame rate, bit rate, etc. So we'll go through those things one at a time. So if we look at the top here, the first thing that we're going to select is our channel. So in this case, I've selected channel 7. I could select channel 1, I could select channel 2, I could select channel 3. I'm going to go back to 7. So we've got channel 7 selected. The next thing that you've got in the list here is your code stream type. Now, this sometimes catches people out. Essentially what it's doing, we have 3 options here. We have continuous, motion detection, and alarm. Now this is not selecting whether we're recording in continuous, motion detection, or alarm. This is simply allowing us to set what the recorder or what the camera is going to send to us in the event of continuous recording, so standard regular video coming from the camera, MD or motion detection recording, so anytime there's motion in the image and we've got motion sensing set up, or alarm, so if there's an alarm input on the camera and it's triggered, or if you've got an alarm input on the recorder and it's triggered. So any settings that I change when I have continuous selected in here are actually going to only change when we're recording in continuous mode, so your full-time mode. Any settings I change in the MD section here are only going to apply to things that happen or events that happen during motion detection. So video that's sent from the camera during motion detection. If I set to alarm, the same thing. So anytime there's an alarm on the camera, it's going to use these settings here, all the settings on this page, and send data or send video to the recorder using those settings. So in this case, I'm only going to show you how to configure continuous. Everything's exactly the same for motion detection or alarm. It's just, obviously, it's going to be occurring at a different time. So I'll start with continuous. Now, the first thing that you see in this list here, or the third thing down the list, is compression. So compression refers to the codec which is being used to package the video before sending it to the recorder. Codec stands for coder decoder. Essentially, we're talking about the encoding section or the coder section here, but the options that we have up here, essentially we have three basic options. We have H.264, MJPEG or Motion JPEG, and H.265. Now, H.264 is divided up into three sections: H.264B, H.264, and H.264H. This refers to the profile, the H.264 profile, which is in use. So H.264B being the baseline profile, H.264 just being a standard profile, and H.264H being a high profile. Now, if you're going to use H.264, I suggest you use the high profile unless you have a good reason to not use the high profile because you're using some other third-party software which doesn't support it. It will result in the best image quality. Your next option in the list is, as we were talking about, Motion JPEG. Motion JPEG or MJPEG is not often used anymore. It's kind of left here as a legacy thing. However, some home automation systems, if you're connecting our recorder to a home automation system, may require MJPEG simply because they don't support H.264 or H.265. Now, H.265 is the newest codec available. H.265 refers to the high efficiency video coding codec. If you have an H.265 compliant camera such as this one and your recorder supports H.265 such as the NVR8PRO6, I suggest you select H.265. It will result in the best image quality for a given bit rate. So you'll be able to have a much higher image quality for less storage space consumed, so a longer overall storage period. In this case, we'll just set it back to H.264, so we'll leave it the same. Now, the next things that I'm going to show you in here are very, very closely related. So resolution, frame rate, and bit rate are all very closely related. I'll explain what they are first up. So your resolution essentially is the number of pixels in the image. So normally we'll actually write this in your horizontal resolution first, so your number of pixels in the horizontal direction first, and then the number of pixels in your vertical orientation. So the first thing, if you think of it that way, that means that we've got, in this camera image, we've got 2,592 pixels in the horizontal direction and 1,520 pixels in the vertical direction. Now, obviously we can change the resolution. As you can see down here, we can set it to anything in this list. Now I'm going to leave that there for now until I explain the others. Now, frame rate is the next thing that you'll see down here. Frame rate is usually pretty self-explanatory, but essentially refers to the number of images that the camera is going to send us per second. So in this case, the camera is going to send us 25 images per second. As you know, video is broken up into still images. So in this case, we're going to be giving us 25 images to animate into video every second. Now the next thing, like I said before, you can change the bitrate, the frame rate. I'll show you how to do that in a second. So bitrate refers to the amount of video data that the camera is sending to us every second. It's expressed in kilobits, so as you can see there, KB over S, or kilobits per second. It is the only value which affects your recording time. So if I want to, for whatever reason, increase my recording time for a given hard drive size, I will need to reduce this value. If I want better quality and I'm okay with losing a bit of recording time, I want to increase this value. So bitrate is tied in very closely to resolution and frame rate. So typically, if you're going to reduce your bitrate, you're going to also need to reduce either your resolution or your frame rate to keep the same quality image. We'll go over that a bit more in depth in another video, but suffice to say, at the moment, if I reduce my bitrate, you're probably also going to want to reduce your frame rate for a given resolution. So the other thing I want to show you on here is the bitrate type. Now, bitrate type refers to the encoding strategy, let's say, that the camera uses to send data to the recorder. Now, by default, it's set at CBR, or a constant bitrate, which means that if I set my bitrate down here to 8,192, the camera will always send me 8,192 kilobits per second. Now, the quality will vary depending upon the amount of motion in the image, but there will always be 8,192 kilobits per second sent. So your other option, though, is to fix So we've fixed the bit rate in this case, but your other option is to fix the quality instead of the bit rate. Now this is actually can be used quite effectively to reduce the amount of hard drive space that you use. So if you move from CBR to VBR, or variable bit rate, now instead of simply setting the bit rate, we also have a quality section that we can set. Now this is a relative value. You need to experiment with it depending on your scene complexity and the camera that you've got, but essentially quality of 1 means that you want the least possible data in use, and quality of 6 means you want the best quality images. So what this does is we still have an 8,192 kilobit per second peak, but if there's not much going on, so if let's say if we have we've got a camera staring in an office and it's mainly white walls, the camera does not actually need to send the full 8,192 kilobits every second to show you those white walls. It can send less. So that's what it will do. It'll send, you'll see that the camera bit rates will drop considerably. You might see, maybe 1 megabit per second instead of 8 megabit per second. However, when there's motion, when there's movement, when something's actually happening, it will ramp the bit rate straight back up again so that you've actually got a fixed scene quality rather than a fixed scene bit rate. So that there's quite useful. So I'll leave it set at CBR for now, just so that we don't change anything, but essentially that's what it's a very good thing to look at. You may want to experiment with that, particularly if you're running out of hard drive space on a recorder and you either don't want to or don't have the ability to add additional hard drive space to that recorder. So the next thing, you probably look to the right here and you'll see everything looks pretty much the same but on a different section. Now, this is our substream setup. Now, what's a substream? Well, substream is also sometimes called an extra stream, but essentially what it is the data that the camera is sending through a second video stream. So we've got our main stream, which is our high quality stream. So this is the thing that we're going to be recording typically, so that we can look at it later for forensic quality, etc. Your substream is what you're viewing on a mobile phone, what you're viewing when you're in a 9-way split, such as the one that we're currently looking at here in this image. That's what's going to be shown as your lower quality stream. So if I full screen a camera, I'm going to be seeing the main stream. If, however, I'm viewing in a 9-way split, or I'm viewing through a mobile phone, or I'm viewing across the internet through a web browser or using Smart PSS, this is the section here that I'm going to be looking at. So typically what you want to do as a basic strategy, I suppose, for setting these units up is you want to leave your bit rates on your mainstream set as high as you can to give you the hard drive space or the hard drive capacity, the amount of time that you need. However, on the substream side of things, you really need to adjust it based on the internet connection that you're going to be remote viewing with, assuming you are going to be doing remote view. If you're not going to be doing remote view, it doesn't really matter. Leave them set to a megabit. All settings default, that's fine. However, if you are going to be connecting, let's say, across a slow ADSL connection, you really need to change this value down because obviously ADSL connections, typically you'll be using less than a megabit. You'll be able to upload less than a megabit per second. This single channel here is going to be using a megabit. So you'll find that you'll get dropped frames and the image will be coming through very slow. So what I would do typically in a situation like this is I would leave my compression at the same as whatever I've currently got set on my mainstream. I would set this as D1. So D1 is basically the same resolution as an analog camera, a typical analog camera, but I'd leave that set there. Now, your frame rate you may want to drop slightly, but you can leave it where it is. The only thing I would really suggest you change is your bit rate. Now, your bit rate will need to be reduced to something that will work for the connection that you've got there. Now, if you've got an ADSL connection, for instance, and you want to be able to view 4 cameras at a time remotely, then the highest you would probably want to set it to would be 256 kilobits per second. Now, obviously, if you need to go lower than that, you will need to reduce your bit rate, your frame rate, I should say. That will allow you to reduce your bit rate even further. As in this previous section, you can also set variable bit rate here and set a quality with a maximum bit rate here. But yeah, essentially, if you notice when you remote connect through a mobile phone that everything's very slow, this is the section you want to play with. This is the section you want to adjust. Keep in mind, if you do have a very good internet connection, let's say you've got an NBN connection or something similar, some sort of similar fiber connection where you have a very high upload speed. So let's say you've got a 40 megabit upload speed, as is a standard NBN connection, you pretty much don't need to worry about any of this. This is only for when you're connecting across a slow connection. You can leave everything as default otherwise. Now, the other things I probably haven't gone over yet on this page are your reference bitrate down here. So this just gives you a basic indication of what bitrate you should probably think about setting if you've got a given resolution and a given frame rate. Now, if I change the frame rate here, my reference bitrate is going to change. Same goes over here for the substream. If I change my frame rate, my reference bitrate will change. Now, it's just an indication. Obviously, the recorder will prevent you from doing settings that are too outlandish, so obviously it won't let me set less than 1536 kilobits per second for a 4 megapixel camera at 12 frames per second. But yeah, overall, just play with those settings to see what suits you best. Obviously, the less data you're consuming, so if you reduce your bitrate, the longer your hard drive space is going to last. So the last section here is audio/video. Now this is something that people get caught up on sometimes, but essentially what this is referring to is the audio on the mainstream, your audio on the substream, and your video on the substream. Now, typically, the only reason people use this usually is to turn off audio. So, for instance, in New South Wales, you'll want to be turning off audio on any camera, just as a result of the laws that we have here. So you'll uncheck those two boxes. This one here will actually disable your substream video. So normally you're going to want to leave that on. There's only sort of rare situations where you're going to want to turn that off. I would suggest you leave it on all the time. So yeah, that's essentially everything in the encoding section here, the encode tab. Now if we go to overlay, so the overlay tab refers to anything that you want to overlay on screen, so any text you want to overlay on screen. As you can see, this is a channel specific feature, so I can select channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, etc., channel 6. Now I'm going to go back to channel 4 just because this is the one that you can see me on over here. So I'll go to channel 4, and as you can see, we've got a number of options. So time display is the first one. Now time display, pretty self-explanatory, is whether you want to display the time on screen. You can uncheck that to remove it. Channel display, again, if you want to display a channel on screen, you can uncheck that to remove it. Cover area. Now this is our masking. So if for some reason we wanted to mask out an area, like let's say there was an area that we didn't want people watching, like a bathroom for instance, we can mask that out. Customized tile is the next one. Now this is anything that doesn't apply above. So let's say you wanted to put a custom label on a camera. You wanted to put a name on there, or you wanted to name the building or the block or something like that. You can basically put anything there. You've got 5 lines of text that you can stick. Obviously you can change your text alignment, and you enable it from this section here. So once I've decided what I want to actually display on screen, moving the location of this around is pretty straightforward. So if you look over here at the default location for time, for instance, up in the top right here, you'll see on camera 3 that's where it's normally set. Now I'm going to change that location on camera 4, so I'll go set. You'll see where time is, and I'm going to move it down here to the bottom of this screen here. Now once I've decided where I want to put it, I'll right click, and I'll go, let's say we'll change the channel section as well. So I'll go set. I can move channel up to maybe up here somewhere. And obviously I'm just right clicking to go back here, okay? So once I come in here and move something around, I'm right clicking to exit. Now cover area is masking, as we discussed earlier, so I'm going to select that. Now this gives me the option of setting up to 4 separate masking zones. So in this case I'm going to actually set all 4, and I'll select set. Now I've got 4 boxes here that I can drag around. Now I can make these boxes bigger if I want to. I can make them smaller if I want to, and I can move them around just simply by clicking and dragging. So I'm going to mask that out there, and I'll probably make it a little bit bigger. So as you can see, 1, 2, 3, and 4 zones. So now I'm going to right click to move out of there. Now the only other thing is we may want to set a customized tile. So like I said before, we can add up to 5 lines of text in here. I'm just going to do the first one. And once I've done that, I can set its location. So let's move it somewhere that we can see, maybe up here somewhere. Okay, so right click wants to do that. Once I've got everything where I want it, click apply. And now if I'll just jump out of here just so you can see it. If I full screen this camera, there you go. There's all the things that we set up. We moved those boxes around, so we've got our masking zones and the text and our camera location. Now, I'll just go back into where we were and default that just to send everything back to where it was. Click apply and everything's gone and back the way that it was before. So that's the overlay tab. Now if we move to the snapshot section, now snapshots aren't used very often, but essentially what a snapshot does is it just takes a still image at a set period of time, a set interval. This is all set up in the event, or sorry, in the storage section under schedule, but what this section here does is just affects how the images are taken. So if you look through here, this is how many times we're going to take a snapshot, so how many images we're going to take. Channel, this is the channel that we're currently configuring. 6, 7, obviously up to 8, go back to 1. Mode, timing or trigger, so you can take a snapshot on timing or a snapshot on trigger. Our resolution, our image quality from 1 to 6, and our snapshot interval. That goes up to 1 hour, or 3,600 seconds. Now, this isn't used very often. To be honest, just don't worry too much about it at all. Just operate on the video side of things, and you can take snapshots from the moving video. So the last thing that we've got here on the camera section is camera name. Now we went over this a little bit a second ago when we were talking about our overlay settings, but essentially this just sets the name that's on the camera. Now I still have camera 4 full screened, so what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to change the name that's on camera 4 to call it whatever we want to call it. So let's just call it test. And space 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll right click to close that and I'll apply. And there you go. That's changed the camera name. If you have any other questions or something you'd like clarified, maybe a video that you'd like us to do, simply just let us know. Either leave a comment below or send an email to sales@rhinoco.com.au. I hope you found this video useful and that it'll help you on your next install. Thanks.